We had plenty, yeah. A lot of negotiating. No, 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 not in the third balcony, thank you.
It's called the gods.
Tonight's talk is the third and final in the series, The Church in the Third Millennium. I don't want to go over what we talked about before. It is actually on YouTube if you want to look back and see what we did. But there's two things that we have to consider, I think. And the first one is we have to remember that the millennium that we live in is still influenced by the Enlightenment, 18th century. That thinking is still here today, and I think it's probably one of the strongest influences, the age of reason. Whereas reason, which is a God-given gift, of course, of intellect, reason has surpassed, overcome, and whatever we want to use term, the spiritual dimension of man. And ontology, which means the study of being, what is the being, what is existence, what is man, ontology being replaced by psychology. I think we will all agree on that. We're living today in a pluralistic society. In other words, a society in which you can believe what you like, you can do almost what you like, and the emphasis is on the individual, but you can't do anything if you don't accept the pluralistic society. Then you're at fault. So that immediately really denies any sort of dialogue with Christianity, which will not compromise with this pluralistic society, because there are certain things in society we do not agree with. But according to this philosophy, you have to agree with everything, except disagree. And this is the irony of it. So we can see where that's coming from. So I made a note here. We live in a pluralistic society where there are no absolutes. No absolutes, except the absolute of individualism. And I'll expand on that in a moment. So today's man is a socio-biological machine governed by the new culture of the media and advertising. So there is a new culture, and this is called the media, and certainly advertising, which controls the thinking of most people. Enlightenment rejects ontology. In other words, it rejects the metaphysical and the spiritual, because everything must be based on reason. If I can touch it, see it, then it must exist. If I can't, then it's very doubtful whether it could exist. So that was the thinking of the Enlightenment, the age of reason. And this has led to, when I was studying in the early 70s, I was studying child development, and there was very much a trend in what's called psychobiology. This was trying to find out how children develop and what are the biological processes that contribute to it. I found it fascinating. A lot of the articles I found were in Scientific American, so you can look it up online. The thing is that, and they were talking about how neurotransmitters affect behavior. Well, neurotransmitters, the chemistry of the brain, how it affects your behavior, how you think. Well, of course, it's involved in the process, but it's not the cause. That's where we would, differ from this mechanistic, psychological view of man. And the irony of it, for me, the irony of it is that using this what we call a Newtonian theory of cause and effect, which exists, of course, we can't deny it, it happens. This science, this physics, is being challenged by quantum theory. Now, if you study quantum theory, and the best of luck, because it's very, very complicated, at the level of quantum theory, I don't want to go into a great definition, but quantum theory is the study of little things, the minute level of electrons and the atom. the behavior of these, in that world of quantum theory, does not behave according to Newtonian physics. It actually is more metaphysical, if we have to use an expression, and I would say spiritual. This is, but with the sociological sciences, sociology, psychology, they still follow the Newtonian principles. I'm sorry to be sort of technical about this, and please follow it up yourself if you're interested, and get back to me if you really understand quantum theory. It's an amazing world, but anyway, this is it. Just my notes here. So today we have a purely mechanistic view of society. But because of this, we remain at a material level. This is, and Professor Christos Yanaras, who was is a great theologian and philosopher, Greek philosopher, former teacher at the Athens Institute of Theology and Athens University Department of Philosophy. He says that there are three main factors that we have to consider living in the third millennium. And the first one he mentions, which I've said already, is quantum mechanics, quantum theory. We have to be aware of that. I'm not saying we have to understand it. I'm saying we have to be aware that that is where science is going, and that the old science, which is associated with the age of reason, is on the way out, if that's such a thing. The second factor is that nationalism is disappearing, and it's moving towards totalitarianism, which eventually moves to barbarism. So you destroy a nation, and then you have something comes into power, which is a dictatorship. We have an example of that, the European Union. This is a union of non-elected officials who can pass laws to control other countries. That's putting it mildly. Obviously, my sympathies are probably, you can guess, in that area. So that leads to totalitarianism, which leads to the breakdown of society and barbarism. There could be civil war. I hope not here, but it can be in certain places where people will end up going on the streets to fight because they can't get what they want. I mean, the whole rundown of society. This is the second. So the first one is science has left behind the old model, and now the second thing is nationalism is being destroyed. Why is it being destroyed? Because it's leading to globalism, world government. I want to mention, actually, but I suddenly thought about it. If you remember when ISIS was in Iraq, they destroyed this famous arch, which led into the temple of Baal. This was the archway into a temple in which they burnt babies as offerings. Well, ISIS blew it up. Now I don't know how I don't know the sequence of events, but somebody managed to make a copy of it. This is with 3D technology. So they had a full-size arch, probably 18 feet high, and they shipped it. They wanted to put it in Times Square, but evangelical Christians were in protest. They said, "This is pagan. This is an evil god. You know, read your Bible. You know who he is." And so it was abandoned, but it was moved to London. London being at the time the centre of banking, international banking. It isn't anymore, but it was at that time. And so they set it up in Trafalgar Square, which is like a victory square in London, if you've been there. And there was a huge ceremony of unveiling it. Never found out why they did it. And I'm not going to say why, because I mean, I obviously have my own theories. Then the third time, it was shipped to Dubai. And it coincided with World Government Conference. So I'll leave the rest to your imagination. This is a part of the third millennium. The church is living in a hostile society, a society that is hostile to Christianity. So what can we do? We need to be aware. Yanaras comes up with the third factor. So the first one is science, quantum theory. The second one is nationalism disappearing, and turning into some total world government. And then the third, he's saying the modern individualism. And this individualism threatens society as community. The individuals are outside of community. In community, we are persons. So as Christians, we are persons. We're not individual. We have individual qualities, and obviously we have individual ideas. But as being in ourselves, in our ontology, we are persons. And society today is working against that, to destroy the idea of personhood. Because you have personhood, you have society. And if you have society, you have an agreement between people. In the pluralistic society, you don't have agreement because you all can do what you like. And you're not allowed to criticize the other person, except if you're a Christian and you're outside of this you don't accept these political theories. And this individualism implies that man is purely a biological entity, a kind of machine which society can govern and shape. So Maximus the Confessor says the human person is a relationship between beings. This is the essence of our faith. Our Orthodox faith is not a religion, and I'll be saying this forever. It's not a religion, it is a relationship with God. And each one of us has to develop that relationship. It's no good following the rules. They're important because they help us, they're the guide. But it's not, in itself, it is not enough. We have to have a relationship with Christ. That means we have to lead a spiritual life. How do we develop this relationship? We develop it through prayer, through following the teachings of the church, the fasting, being part of a society, a community. This is very important. You can't have a personal religion. We're part of a much larger whole, which is the body of Christ. This is community. This is the perfect community. And so we have to develop our spiritual life in order to have this relationship, like you do with a person. God is a person. I mean, this is a miracle. The God of man, Christ, is a person. You're not praying to some entity, some force in the universe. You're praying to a person. The second person of the Holy Trinity. So this is a relationship. And so each one of us here tonight needs to have that relationship. How? Through prayer and fasting and love for each other. Because community is held together by love. Any other form of association is usually due by contract. We haven't signed a contract to get together to be Christians. That's the secular view. That this is a mystical, and it's based on love. The other threat that we have to the church, because we live in the world and we're surrounded by the media, as you all know, and the internet and advertising. I mean, if you don't have certain products that they recommend, you're not really human. I remember that in the 60s, and then the advertising, if you don't have this product, then you're not a proper person. And then, excuse me, and then if you don't do this for your children, you're not a proper parent. So you must provide breakfast. You've got to have Wheaties or whatever cereal was popular at the time, and special soap, because you have to look after your family. Yes, of course these things are okay, but then they become guidelines, become a control of how we think, and then how our kids grow up expecting all these things. Society is controlled by the media and by advertising. I can't think of any examples where it isn't. And we're all afflicted by it, actually, all of us. The other element is hedonism, which I'd mentioned before. That was a philosophy, which was to follow that which is beautiful and what you like. And it was a philosophy, and as I mentioned before, philosophy in those days was not what it is today. It was a religion. If you wanted to be a philosopher, follow the teachings of a philosopher, you had to lead an ascetic life. Yes, fasting, strict morals, and then you could enjoy pleasure, because that's what life is all about. That's a certain teaching. Today we have Hellenism without the philosophy, which is self-indulgence. Even on a simple example, going to the supermarket, the teller has to say to you, "Have a nice day." And you need to turn around and say, "No, don't." I mean, challenges, you know. I wouldn't say that exactly, but have a nice day. Because you have to be happy. You have to enjoy yourself. And you cannot be happy if you criticize other people, especially if they've got a different lifestyle, which you find abhorrent, against God's laws. But you have to be friendly. Now, we have to love everybody, but we don't have to like everybody. And we certainly don't have to follow people's philosophies, which we find degenerate. But according to the pluralistic society, yes, because you have to have respect for everybody, which ends up having respect for nobody, because it's lack of respect for God. There's so many factors here. So we're living in this millennium, the third, but in each millennia, there have been champions of orthodoxy. St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil, 3 hierarchs, St. John of Damascus, St. Simeon the New Theologian, St. Gregory, later, St. Gregory Palamas. Today, do we have people? Well, we've had St. John, and in the third millennium, which is from 2001, is how we count it, I can think of 3. And 2 of them are Romanian confessors and martyrs. Father Arsenia Papachok, his book is available, please read it. It's wonderful, it's amazing. And Father George Calciu, also published. Both books are published by the St. Herman Press, so they are available online. I do recommend them. And the third one has not been canonized, but I think he will be. Archimandrite Athanasius Mytilenos, which means from Mytilene, which is an island off Greece. He gave a series of talks. Apparently there were 8,000 talks that he gave that had been recorded in Greek, and people are working on translations. He's died now, but he was very outspoken. If you read any of his essays, he doesn't spare anything. He says as it is. And his sermons are based on the Apocalypse, on the book of Revelation. He's using that as a means of preaching. Very powerful, very knowledgeable, a champion of orthodoxy. He would be put in jail. If he lived in the UK, he would be actually in jail for hate speech, because he's actually preaching what St. Paul taught us. So that's the position that we've got ourselves into. Maybe we're just playing for time before we're not allowed to have these meetings. It could happen. It could happen, but God willing it won't. So we need to understand that we are in a war zone, in a sense, morally and spiritually. So how do we deal with it? What do we do? Well, it's personal relationship with Christ. And I've got here a note, how to maintain our faith. What does it mean to have faith? It isn't simply what I believe, because anybody can say, I believe something, and that implies that there's an opposite, or an alternative rather, to I believe. Faith is a gift from God. And I will quote Elder Porphyrius, as you know, is a new saint, what he says. Such faith, quote, such faith manifests itself not by oral tradition, but with spiritual eyes it beholds the mysteries concealed in the soul. Faith opens up the soul to spiritual knowledge. Faith opens the eyes of the soul, and the secret and divine riches that are hidden away from the eyes of the sons of the flesh, but unveiled by the Spirit to those who abide at Christ's table. Christ's table? Holy Communion. We receive Holy Communion regularly. That is our strength. This is a part of obtaining faith. Faith is a gift from God. So how do I get it? By prayer, love, regular communion. And faith will then be given to us, and now the soles of our eyes will open, and we will see things that we haven't seen before. And I'm not talking about physical eyes. I'm not talking about visions. I'm talking about understanding. And all you say, okay, that's what it's all about. I understand. This is what we have to develop now if we are going to keep our faith and be part of the body of Christ. Read these martyrs, the Romanian martyrs. Incredible life within a terrible prison. Imagine being tortured every day, not just tortured once, but on a daily basis for a number of years. And yet the faith grew even stronger. I don't want to give examples because I think you should read these books and take it and imbibe it yourself and see how, where are we on the path of faith? Do we have faith? Have we been given faith by Christ? Yes, we have a belief, that's obvious, but faith is a special gift. I think it makes sense of in the Gospel, if you remember in St. Matthew's Gospel, it talks about if you have faith, you can say to this mountain, go in, be cast into the sea. And you read it and you think, yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? But do we understand it? No. But then we understand that faith is a gift, it's a supernatural, it's a mystical gift, then yes, it could happen. Because then we begin to live in a world that is not bound by Newtonian physics. How was St. John of Kronstadt in two places at the same time? Well, maybe because he was part of quantum theory, I don't know. Yeah. Saint Paisius talking to French pilgrims, and then giving them some coffee and then leaving, and his cell attendant, monk, came along and said, how are you? And they said, oh, wonderful, we had this fantastic talk by the elder. He said, well, that doesn't make sense, because the elder's not here. He's in Egypt, visiting. And also, he doesn't speak French. But St. Paisius spoke Greek, and everybody else understood what he said in their language. This is Pentecost. Living, 1980s. I think he refers in 94, or not as late as that. In other words, he's contemporary. This is our faith. This is what we believe. This is what we have to express, and especially for our children in the third millennium.